The stars flickered like tiny pinpricks of hope against the endless black canvas of space. Captain HFY Park sat in her command chair, her fingers dancing lightly over the holographic controls of the UES horizon. The ship hummed with a quiet energy that spoke of carefully maintained machinery and human determination. Around her, the bridge crew worked with a casual efficiency that would have seemed strange to any alien observer. They moved without the rigid formality expected by most galactic species. A small speaker near her elbow played soft music, something from an old Earth playlist, mixing with the gentle beeps and clicks of advanced technology. "Approaching Outer Rim Trading Lane," announced Lieutenant Kim from the navigation station. His voice was calm, almost bored. "Standard communication channels are open." Jaehua nodded. Her eyes, sharp and alert, scanned the vast emptiness outside. Humans had been exploring space for decades now, but each journey still felt like an adventure. The Horizon was not a military vessel, not exactly. It was more of a multipurpose exploration and trade ship, the kind of vessel that carried everything from scientific equipment to rare trade goods. In the distance, a massive shape began to take form. The Vortian diplomatic vessel was impossible to miss, a behemoth of gleaming metal and intricate design. Where human ships were practical and somewhat rough around the edges, Vortian vessels looked like they had been sculpted by artists more than engineers. "Incoming transmission," called out the communications officer. His fingers hovered over the translation systems, ready to process whatever message was coming. The holographic display flickered to life. Ambassador Krell of the Vortian Diplomatic Corps appeared, a creature that looked like a cross between a tall, thin mantis and a bureaucrat. His multiple eyes blinked in a complicated pattern that roughly translated to official annoyance. "Unidentified human vessel." The translation software rendered Krell's clicking language into smooth English. "You are entering a restricted trade corridor. Prepare for immediate inspection and verification of cargo manifests." Jaehua raised an eyebrow. The tone was familiar. She had heard it countless times before. It was the sound of a bureaucracy so old and so complex that it had forgotten the purpose of its own rules. "This is Captain Park of the UES Horizon," she responded, her voice steady. "We have full clearance for this trading lane. Our manifest is current and our cargo is registered with the Galactic Trade Commission." Krell's additional eyes, he had 6 in total, began to rotate in what the translation software identified as a gesture of skepticism. "All vessels must submit to a complete scan. This is non-negotiable." On the bridge, the crew exchanged quick glances. They knew what was coming. Captain Park had a reputation, after all. "Ambassador," Jaehua said, a slight smile playing on her lips, "I don't think you understand how this is going to work." What happened next would become a moment etched into galactic history, a small interaction that would slowly, inexorably begin to change everything the established civilizations thought they knew about humanity. The Horizon was about to teach the galaxy a lesson it would never forget. The silence on the bridge was thick with tension. Captain HFY Park watched the Vortian diplomatic vessel with a calm that would have unnerved most observers. Her fingers moved almost lazily across the ship's control panel, a series of quick, precise touches that looked almost random to the untrained eye. "Jun," she called to the communications officer, "initiate maintenance protocol Alpha 7. Jun blinked. This wasn't a standard procedure, but he trusted his captain. His fingers flew across the holographic keyboard, executing the command. What happened next was nothing short of miraculous, or terrifying, depending on who was watching. The Horizon's systems began to shift. It was like watching a living machine reconfigure itself. External panels adjusted, internal circuits realigned, and power distribution started to pulse in unexpected patterns. To the Vortians, it would look like the human ship was performing some kind of strange electronic dance. On the Vortian vessel, alarms began to sound. Ambassador Krell's multiple eyes spun in complete confusion. "What is happening?" he demanded, his clicking language translated into a mix of anger and panic. The truth was simple. Captain Park had just initiated a maintenance sequence that was uniquely human. Where other species saw rigid systems and fixed protocols, humans saw flexible networks that could be adjusted on the fly. The Horizon wasn't just performing a maintenance check, it was actively probing and adjusting its own systems in real time. Suddenly, the Vortian ship's communication systems went dark. Its scanning beams flickered and died. Power fluctuated across its massive hull. It wasn't a full shutdown. It was something far more complicated. Lieutenant Kim leaned towards the captain. "They're completely disabled," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. Jaehua nodded. "Not destroyed. Just temporarily confused." This was the fundamental difference between humans and most galactic species. Where others saw systems as fixed and unchangeable, humans saw them as puzzles to be solved, networks to be understood and manipulated. The bridge crew worked with a calm efficiency that would have seemed impossible to alien observers. They weren't panicking. They weren't even particularly surprised. This was just another day of solving problems. On the Vortian ship, Ambassador Krell was experiencing something close to a mental breakdown. His entire career had been built on the idea of strict protocols and unyielding bureaucratic systems. And now, a human ship had just demonstrated that those systems could be bypassed with what seemed like casual ease. Reboot their primary systems, Jaehua instructed June, but leave their secondary communication arrays locked. They need a moment to understand. It took less than 3 minutes for the Horizon to restore partial functionality to the Vortian vessel. But those 3 minutes would be remembered as the moment everything changed. In the vast emptiness of space, a small human ship had just shown the galaxy that the rules were more flexible than anyone had ever imagined. And this was just the beginning. Back on the bridge, Captain Park allowed herself a small smile. Sometimes, the best way to communicate was to show, not tell. The Galactic Council chamber was unlike any meeting room in the universe. Massive holographic displays covered curved walls, showing star systems, trade routes, and real-time communication feeds. Hundreds of alien representatives sat in their designated spaces, each with technology that allowed them to translate and communicate instantly. But today, something was different. Min-Ki Kim sat alone at the human delegation table. He was young for a diplomatic advisor, with sharp eyes and a calm that seemed almost impossible given the circumstances. Around him, the representatives from various alien species looked like they were ready to explode with anger. The Qualex representative was the first to speak. Its body, which looked like a collection of shifting crystal fragments, vibrated with rage. "This is unprecedented." The translation software converted its complex language into clear, angry words. A human vessel has directly interfered with a diplomatic inspection. Next to the Qualex, a Vortian ambassador, not Ambassador Krell, but a higher-ranking official, clicked and whirred. They must be sanctioned. They must be stopped. Min-Ki said nothing. He simply pressed a button on his datapad. The main holographic display changed. Instead of showing angry alien faces, it now displayed a series of technical diagrams, system maps, and complex interaction charts. To most observers, it would look like a complicated mess of lines and colors. But to those who understood technology, it was something else entirely. "Ladies and gentlemen of the Galactic Council," Min-Ki began, his voice calm and clear, "let me explain what actually happened." The diagrams started to move. They showed how the human ship, the Horizon, had not destroyed the Vortian vessel. Instead, it had performed a complex system interaction that was both a defensive and diagnostic maneuver. Where the aliens saw an attack, humans saw a sophisticated problem-solving technique. "Our ship did not attack," Min-Ki continued. "It performed a standard maintenance protocol that happens to interact with external systems in a way most species have never considered possible." The room went silent. The Qualex representative's crystal body stopped vibrating. The Vortian ambassador's multiple eyes stopped spinning. They were listening. Min-Ki explained how human technology approached problems differently. Where most species built systems with rigid boundaries, humans created flexible networks. Where others saw walls, humans saw opportunities for connection and adaptation. This is not aggression, he said. This is simply how we solve problems. Some representatives looked confused. Others looked scared. A few, the more technologically advanced species, looked genuinely intrigued. The presentation continued. Min-Ki broke down the entire incident minute by minute, showing how the human ship had not only protected itself, but had also prevented any potential real damage to the Vortian vessel. It was like watching a surgeon perform a complex operation with tools that looked more like magic than science. When he finished, the chamber was completely silent. The head of the Galactic Council, an ancient being that looked like a combination of mist and starlight, spoke. "We will review this information," it said. "But know this, humanity has just changed everything we thought we understood about first contact." Min-Ki allowed himself a very small smile. This was just the beginning. Outside the council chamber, in the vast darkness of space, the UES Horizon continued its journey, unaware that it had just rewritten the rules of galactic interaction. The Galactic Council chamber was unlike any meeting room in the universe. Massive holographic displays covered curved walls, showing star systems, trade routes, and real-time communication feeds. Hundreds of alien representatives sat in their designated spaces, each with technology that allowed them to translate and communicate instantly. But today, something was different. Min-Ki Kim sat alone at the human delegation table. He was young for a diplomatic advisor, with sharp eyes and a calm that seemed almost impossible given the circumstances. Around him, the representatives from various alien species looked like they were ready to explode with anger. The Qualex representative was the first to speak. Its body, which looked like a collection of shifting crystal fragments, vibrated with rage. "This is unprecedented." The translation software converted its complex language into clear, angry words. A human vessel has directly interfered with a diplomatic inspection. Next to the Qualex, a Vortian ambassador, not Ambassador Krell, but a higher-ranking official, clicked and whirred. "They must be sanctioned. They must be stopped." Min-Ki said nothing. He simply pressed a button on his datapad. The main holographic display changed. Instead of showing angry alien faces, it now displayed a series of technical diagrams, system maps, and complex interaction charts. To most observers, it would look like a complicated mess of lines and colors. But to those who understood technology, it was something else entirely. "Ladies and gentlemen of the Galactic Council," Min-Ki began, his voice calm and clear, "let me explain what actually happened." The diagrams started to move. They showed how the human ship, the Horizon, had not destroyed the Vortian vessel. Instead, it had performed a complex system interaction that was both a defensive and diagnostic maneuver. Where the aliens saw an attack, humans saw a sophisticated problem-solving technique. "Our ship did not attack," Min-Ki continued. "It performed a standard maintenance protocol that happens to interact with external systems in a way most species have never considered possible." The room went silent. The Qualex representative's crystal body stopped vibrating. The Vortian ambassador's multiple eyes stopped spinning. They were listening. Min-Ki explained how human technology approached problems differently. Where most species built systems with rigid boundaries, humans created flexible networks. Where others saw walls, humans saw opportunities for connection and adaptation. "This is not aggression," he said. "This is simply how we solve problems." Some representatives looked confused. Others looked scared. A few, the more technologically advanced species, looked genuinely intrigued. The presentation continued. Min-Ki broke down the entire incident minute by minute, showing how the human ship had not only protected itself, but had also prevented any potential real damage to the Vortian vessel. It was like watching a surgeon perform a complex operation with tools that looked more like magic than science. When he finished, the chamber was completely silent. The head of the Galactic Council, an ancient being that looked like a combination of mist and starlight, spoke. "We will review this information," it said. "But know this, humanity has just changed everything we thought we understood about first contact." Min-Ki allowed himself a very small smile. This was just the beginning. Outside the council chamber, in the vast darkness of space, the UES Horizon continued its journey, unaware that it had just rewritten the rules of galactic interaction. The Meridian colonies looked like a nightmare from space. 12 planetary platforms hung in a delicate dance around a central hub, surrounded by the wreckage of ships and the growing tension of an impending conflict. Captain Sung Ho Choi stood on the bridge of the UES Horizon, watching the chaos unfold. 5 alien species had come together to discipline the human expansion. Their fleet was massive, a collection of ships that looked more like floating cities than military vessels. Each ship carried weapons that could destroy entire continents. Each crew believed they were bringing order to a chaotic universe. They were wrong. "Incoming transmission," called out the communications officer. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the combined alien fleet's lead commander, a creature that looked like a mix between a shark and a military bureaucrat. "Human vessel." The translation software rendered its growling language. "You are ordered to stand down. Your expansion violates multiple galactic treaties." Captain Choi said nothing. He simply watched. The alien commander continued. "You will surrender your colonial claims or face complete destruction." On the bridge, the crew exchanged quick glances. They weren't scared. They were preparing. What happened next would become a legend across multiple star systems. The Horizon didn't attack. It didn't run. Instead, it began to move in a pattern that looked almost like a dance. Its systems shifted and changed. Power rerouted in ways that made no sense to traditional military strategy. The alien fleet fired their first wave of weapons. Massive energy beams that could slice through entire planetary platforms. Any other species would have been destroyed instantly, but not humans. The Horizon seemed to bend. It wasn't exactly dodging. It was more like the ship was understanding the incoming attack before it even happened. Energy beams that should have destroyed the vessel instead passed through empty space where the ship had been milliseconds before. "Defensive pattern Omega," Captain Choi said calmly. It wasn't an order. It was more like a suggestion to the ship itself. The Horizon's systems came alive. It wasn't just a ship anymore. It was a living, thinking entity that understood conflict as a complex problem to be solved. Smaller human support ships began to move. They weren't fighting in any way the alien fleet could understand. They were repositioning, sharing power, creating networks of defense that shifted and changed faster than any computer could track. The alien commander's face went from anger to confusion to something close to fear. Humans didn't fight wars the way other species did. They didn't see conflict as a simple attack and defense scenario. To them, it was a complex system to be understood and manipulated. Within 2 hours, the massive alien fleet was completely disabled. Not destroyed. Not even damaged. Just stopped. No weapons had been fired from the human side. No direct attacks had been made. The alien fleet simply found itself unable to continue its mission. "Communication channels are open," said Jun, the communications officer, a small smile playing on his lips. Captain Choi nodded. "Send our standard response." The message was simple and would be remembered for generations. "We're happy to discuss your concerns." Outside, the stars continued to shine. Another day in the universe. But something had changed. The galaxy was learning that humans were not just another species to be controlled. They were something entirely unexpected. The research station on New Geneva was quiet. Too quiet. Dr. Yoon Park sat at her desk, surrounded by holographic displays that showed complex data from 100 different alien civilizations. She wasn't just a researcher. She was becoming something more, a bridge between human thinking and galactic understanding. A message pinged on her screen. It was from a Quailex research team on the other side of the galaxy. They'd wanted help. Not just any help. They'd wanted a human perspective on a problem they couldn't solve. This was happening more and more these days. Where other species saw walls, humans saw puzzles. Where others saw impossible challenges, humans saw opportunities. It wasn't arrogance. It was simply a different way of looking at the universe. The Galactic Council had been watching. After the incidents at the Sigma outpost, the Meridian colonies, and dozens of other locations, something strange was happening. Species that once feared humans were now seeking them out. A Vordian diplomatic team needed help redesigning their communication networks. A Zarka engineering group wanted assistance with their planetary defense systems. Even the notoriously isolated Crystal Collective had reached out, asking for human consultants. Dr. Park smiled. She pulled up the Quailex research problem. It was a complex issue involving quantum entanglement and energy distribution. Most species would have spent years studying it. Humans would probably solve it before lunch. Her communications device chirped. Another message. This time from a medical research center on a distant moon. They had a disease that had puzzled doctors from 3 different species for decades. Could humans take a look? The universe was changing, and most people didn't even realize it. In trading stations across multiple star systems, human problem solvers were becoming something of a legend. They weren't just workers or consultants. They were like universal adapters, able to fit into any situation and find solutions that nobody else could see. A group of Trellan merchants had a saying now. When in doubt, ask a human. It wasn't a compliment, exactly. It was more of a recognition. Humans didn't follow rules. They understood them, then rewrote them if needed. They didn't see limitations. They saw challenges. Back on the research station, Dr. Park began working on the Quailex problem. Her fingers moved across holographic interfaces, creating connections that seemed random but were actually deeply intelligent. She wasn't just solving a problem. She was teaching. Teaching the galaxy that intelligence wasn't about following rules. It was about understanding them, then knowing when to break them. Outside the station's windows, ships from a dozen different species moved between star systems. Aliens who had once feared human expansion were now depending on human innovation. The most interesting part, humans weren't trying to prove anything. This was just how they operated. This was just who they were. A species that saw the universe not as a fixed system, but as a complex, beautiful puzzle waiting to be understood. Dr. Park looked up from her work and smiled. Another day of solving the impossible was just beginning. The galaxy would never be the same again. The great library of galactic knowledge was unlike any other place in the universe. Floating in deep space, it was a massive structure that held the collected wisdom of thousands of civilizations. Scholars from hundreds of species came here to study, to learn, to understand. But today was different. Professor Jamin Lee stood at the central podium. He was a human philosopher, but that word didn't really describe what he was. He was more of a universal thinker, someone who could see patterns that others missed. Around him, representatives from dozens of alien species listened. Some looked confused. Some looked angry. A few looked excited. Civilization is not about following rules, Jamin began. His voice was calm, clear. Civilization is about solving problems. The translation systems worked overtime, converting his words into countless alien languages. But the meaning was the same everywhere. For thousands of years, most galactic species had believed that true civilization meant strict control. Rules were everything. Following protocols was the highest form of intelligence. Anything else was considered chaos. Humans had just proven that was completely wrong. The Quailex scholar sitting closest to Jamin shifted. Its crystal body moved in a way that showed deep thinking. Explain, it said simply. Jamin pulled up holographic displays. They showed historical examples from Earth. How humans had solved problems that seemed impossible. How they had faced challenges by thinking differently. He showed how humans approach technology. not as a fixed system, but as a living, changing network. He showed how they approached conflict, not as a simple fight, but as a complex problem to be solved. Most species see walls, he explained. Humans see opportunities. The library went silent. The displays showed examples. A human engineer fixing a machine that others had given up on. A diplomatic team finding solutions where others saw only problems. A medical researcher creating new treatments by thinking in ways nobody had before. It wasn't about being better. It was about being different. Civilization is not about control, Jamin repeated. It's about adaptation. About understanding that the universe is always changing. Some alien scholars looked uncomfortable. Others looked excited. A few looked scared. The Vortian ambassador, who had once tried to stop human expansion, now leaned forward. Its multiple eyes focused entirely on Jamin. "You are saying," the ambassador clicked, "that everything we understood about progress is wrong." Jamin smiled. "Not wrong," he said, "just limited." Outside the library, space continued its endless dance. Stars burned. Planets turned. The universe moved forward, always changing. Humans had shown that true intelligence wasn't about following rules. It was about understanding why those rules existed and knowing when to change them. The philosophical shift was happening. Slowly, carefully, but it was happening. The galaxy was learning that civilization was not a fixed point. It was a journey, and humans were leading the way. The Galactic Concordance Hall was never silent. But today, silence fell like a heavy blanket. Yoon Seo Park stood at the center of the massive circular room. She wasn't tall. She wasn't imposing. But something about her made everyone listen. Behind her, holographic displays showed complex networks of information, diplomatic protocols, technological standards, communication guidelines. She was about to change everything. "We're rewriting the rules," she said simply. No drama. No big speech, just a statement of fact. The representatives from hundreds of alien species stared. Some looked confused. Some looked scared. A few looked excited. For centuries, the Galactic Concordance had been a rigid system. Rules were rules. Protocols were protocols. Nothing changed. Nothing moved. Humans had just shown that was a terrible way to exist. Yoon Seo's presentation began. It wasn't a typical diplomatic briefing. It was more like a complete reconstruction of how different species could interact. The old protocols had been built on fear. Fear of conflict. Fear of misunderstanding. Fear of change. The new protocols were built on something different. Flexibility. Adaptation. Understanding. She showed how human problem-solving could be applied to galactic communication, how their approach to technology could revolutionize entire systems of governance, how their understanding of complexity could help species work together in ways nobody had imagined. The Vortian ambassador, who had once tried to stop human expansion, now watched with all 6 of its eyes completely focused. The Quilix representative's crystal body vibrated with a mix of excitement and fear. "We're not destroying your systems," Yoon Seo explained. "We're improving them. We're making them more alive." She demonstrated how human communication techniques could solve diplomatic deadlocks that had existed for hundreds of years. She showed how their technological approaches could improve everything from trade routes to medical research. It wasn't about humans being better. It was about humans seeing things differently. The holographic displays showed complex networks coming to life. Old, stuck systems suddenly becoming flexible. Rigid communication channels transforming into living, breathing networks of understanding. "Civilization is not a fixed point," she said. "It's a journey." Outside the Concordance Hall, ships from different species moved between star systems. Traders who once feared each other now worked together. Research teams from completely different worlds shared information freely. The transformation was happening. Slowly, carefully, but it was happening. The Galactic Concordance had always believed that order meant control. Humans were showing that true order came from understanding. from flexibility, from seeing the universe as a complex, living system. When Yum-Seo finished her presentation, something strange happened. The room, filled with representatives from hundreds of different species, remained silent for a moment. Then they began to clap. Not because humans were superior, but because humans had shown them a new way of seeing the universe, a way that was more alive, more complex, more beautiful. The galaxy would never be the same again. The small office looked out over a massive space station. Captain HFY Park sat in her chair, older now but with eyes that still sparkled with the same curiosity that had changed the galaxy decades ago. Young diplomats and researchers from a dozen different species came to listen. They wanted to understand. They wanted to learn. "We were never trying to be special," she told them. Her voice was calm, clear. "We were just unwilling to accept the limitations others imposed." It had been years since that first encounter at the Sigma outpost. Years since humans had shown the galaxy that being civilized was more than just following rules. It was about solving problems, about understanding, about adapting. The office was filled with items that told a story. A damaged communication relay that had been impossible to fix, now restored. Technical manuals from species that no longer existed. Diplomatic agreements that had once seemed impossible. A young Quailex researcher raised a crystal appendage. "How did you do it?" she asked. "How do humans change everything?" Jaehwa smiled. "We didn't change anything," she explained. "We just showed people that change was possible." The story had become legendary. How a single human ship had challenged an entire system of galactic understanding. How humans had shown that intelligence was not about following rules, but about understanding why those rules existed, and knowing when to break them. The galaxy had learned something important. Civilization was not a fixed point. It was a journey. Outside the window, ships from different species moved together, trading, exploring, working as partners, something that would have been impossible before humans arrived. The young researchers listened carefully. They came from worlds light years apart. Some looked like living crystals, some resembled walking trees. Some were so different from humans that translation systems struggled to capture their basic communication. But they all understood one thing. Humans had taught the galaxy a fundamental truth. "Rules are guidelines," Jaehwa continued. "Not walls, not prison. They are starting points for understanding." She told stories about engineers who fixed impossible machines, about diplomats who found solutions where others saw only problems, about medical researchers who created treatments by thinking in ways nobody had before. It wasn't about being better than other species. It was about being different, about seeing the universe as a complex, living system. The Vortian researcher in the back, descendant of the very ambassador who had once tried to stop human expansion, nodded slowly. Its multiple eyes focused on Jaehwa. "We understand now," the Vortian said. And they did. The galaxy had changed, not through war, not through conflict, but through understanding. Through the simple human ability to look at a problem and see not a limitation, but an opportunity. As the meeting ended, the young researchers looked at Captain Park with something between respect and wonder. They had heard the stories, but hearing them from someone who had lived them was different. Outside, stars continued to shine. Planets turned. The universe moved forward. Humans had shown that true intelligence wasn't about control. It was about adaptation, about seeing the connections others missed. And the galaxy would never be the same again.